Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Conveying Flood Risk Warning, Action and Recovery. Before we begin, the session will be around 45 minutes and we'll be sending out the recording afterwards. Time permitting, we'll be having some questions and answers towards the end. And there'll be a question panel on your screen. Click the question mark symbol if you can't see that, and you can type and submit your questions throughout the webinar today. Also at the end, we'd be grateful if you could complete our short survey, which will pop up. This will help us with future webinars. And finally, just to let you know, you're in listen only mode, so we can't hear you. Okay, to introduce us today, my name is Demelza Potter. I work in the business development team here at CADCorp, and I mainly work with our government customers, helping them make the most of their GIS investment. My colleague today, Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Demelza. Yep, good morning, everybody. My name is Simon Parker. I'm the pre-sales team leader at CADCorp, and this morning I'll be demonstrating how you can use web mapping to sort of identify and communicate those flood-related challenges.
Thank you, Simon. We are just going to switch our cameras off. That will help performance, and you can also view the presentation full screen as well. Okay, so we've got a range of delegates on the line today, lots of you with GIS, analyst, engineer, flood, and other terms in your job titles too. And there's lots of you who are new to CADCorp. So what I thought we'd do, introduce us and what we do to begin with. And today the focus will be using a product called CADCorp Sys Web Map to convey flood information. I'm going to talk about flooding on the Somerset Levels, which is where I live, and I'll give you some examples of where web mapping can help in flood risk, warning, action, community engagement and recovery. The live demo today from Simon will look at each of those headings in practice too. Then, as I said, I'll round up and take questions towards the end. Okay. Just a quick poll to be a little bit interactive to begin with. So let's launch this poll. Do you live within an Environment Agency defined flood zone? If you could choose your answers, please. Yes, no, don't know. And we'll see what results we get from the audience today. Right, let me just share those as the last ones are coming in. Okay, so 13% of you yes, 70% no. So that's good that you do or don't. You do know that you live within an Environment Agency flood zone. If you don't know, it's worthwhile going to the Environment Agency website and putting in your postcode, address details, and finding out if you actually, if you do. But really important to know, and for those of you that yes, you do live in a flood zone, we'll be talking more about that later. Okay, another poll. Let's launch that one. Who would you report a flood to? Again, please click your answers. Would it be the local council, environment agency, water company, or does it depend on what's actually flooding? Again, I'll just leave it a few seconds for all of you to just put those in. And share those results. So most of you, 64%, are telling me it depends on what's flooding, and that's correct. Okay, obviously if it's an emergency, you would call 999. But if it's the rivers or sea flooding, it's the Environment Agency. Sewers or burst water mains, your local water company. Public drains, roads, and groundwater flooding, that's your local council. Okay. Thank you for getting involved in the poll. So, for those of you who are not familiar with us at CADCorp, we are UK based and focused on the development and delivery of our product CADCorp Sys, which includes web, mobile, and desktop GIS applications. and we provide complementary spatial data and services, and we work across those sectors in green on this slide. CAGOP develops software that can be used for identifying, communicating and mitigating flood-related challenges. We're focusing today on web mapping, and the product on screen is called CAGOP Web Map. And in this example, we've got some data that is 1 in 100-year floods around the River Ouse, and we can start to see how web mapping might start us to convey that flood information to the user. But before I pass over to Simon to show you web map in a bit more detail, I thought I would talk to you a bit about flooding on the Somerset Levels. As I mentioned, it's near, I virtually live on the Somerset Levels. It's a coastal plain and wetlands area. Looks quite idyllic with those swans in that picture. The area provides, it's meant to flood, and it provides unique habitats for birds and lots of other wildlife too. Humans have drained it and reclaimed it for agriculture for a long time, since the Middle Ages, and it's well known for willow growing and basket making. But one lesser known fact, in 1607, there was a tsunami which devastated communities living along the Bristol Channel, flooding as far inland as Glastonbury Tor, and probably over 200 square miles and up to 2,000 people who died. Now, we hope history won't repeat itself, but obviously flooding is still a problem today. This is a photo taken from January. I mean, flooding for me is generally an inconvenience, but there is potential for significant impact to this property and the people who live there and beyond. In the UK, we've got lots of coast and low-lying areas and major urban areas situated along rivers. The effects of flooding are made worse by increased rainfall, increasing sea levels caused by climate change as well as population growth. Yes, there's been significant investment in flood defences, but there are still significant problems. So, given the audience today, you guys may be aware of the statistics, but I just wanted to sort of share the scale and the numbers. According to the Environment Agency, in 2022-2023, approximately 5.7 million properties in England were at risk from flooding of some sort. Now, this might be sea and river flooding, surface water, or groundwater flooding. And the potential on the impact on the infrastructure is huge, with a lot of disruption to our daily lives, whether it's sort of water, rail, roads, or other energy infrastructure. I mean, I certainly know myself when the rail lines are flooded and I can't get to my meetings. So, flooding is the primary environmental hazard in the UK. We need to know where the risk is, be prepared, have early warning systems and plans in place, and a coordinated recovery approach. So before, during, and after the event, we need to know about location. And this is where web mapping can help us. I'm going to show you some web mapping examples, and then Simon's going to show you in practice how you can go about utilising web mapping for flooding. So, flood risk to begin with. Looking at flood prone areas, here again we've got an Environment Agency flood zone depicted on a web map. We can start to assess the vulnerability of properties and infrastructure. For example, we look at this address here, or it's actually up to 25 addresses, I think, as probably flats in the background. Obviously, lots of people located or live at that location. Also close by, we've got an electricity substation, a water pumping station, which might be particularly important during a flood event. And we might want to start asking questions like which roads are open or blocked due to the flooding. So moving on to flood warning, web mapping can deliver timely and accurate information. and we can utilize the Environment Agency's live flood APIs. Here we've got some flood warning data of a severity of 3. One is severe. And you can start to see how useful that would be, because it's near real time. There's other information in that API, such as rainfall monitoring stations too, and Simon's actually going to show you that in a little bit more detail. When we look at flood action, taking a slightly different approach to web mapping, and this is a product called CAGCORP Sys Notice Board. Whilst a flood is in progress, we'd want to keep everyone informed, and this product can do this. This information is all related to a specific location. In this example, a postcode. There is a map on there, but it's a very small part of the bigger picture. And this is sort of a dashboard approach where you can integrate widgets from different agencies. So we've got information from the BBC, Environment Agencies, and it can do things like find my nearest searches. And this provides a useful personalized dashboard for every user and location. When we think about community engagement, we want people to be involved. We want people to be able to click on a map and send a photo, or click on their phone using the GPS to report flooding to the relevant agency. And finally, when we're looking at sort of recovery stages, we can bring together web mapping and other software like Power BI, and we have a really powerful toolkit for flexible reporting that everyone can use. Again, more of a dashboard approach, and depending on what we're interested in, we may want to investigate further and look at dwellings, for example, when lots of people may be. We may want to start to look at commercial properties, perhaps care homes and children's nurseries where more vulnerable people might be, or focus on more vulnerable areas based on other statistics like poverty, for example. So we can start answering questions like, at these addresses, or are these people suitable for providing further advice to, or perhaps funding, and other things as well. At this stage, I'm going to pass across to Simon, who is going to give you a live demo. Simon's got various use cases to take you through the same headings that I've been talking about: flood risk, warning action, community engagement, and recovery. Again, feel free to ask any questions in the question panel, and Simon and I will pick those up after the demo. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Demelza. So I'll just share my screen and then I'll make a start on my demonstration. Great. So yeah, as Demelza described, I'm going to show you some ideas on how web mapping can be used to sort of identify, communicate, and mitigate those flood related challenges. So to get the ball rolling, yep. So web mapping can help us visualize flood-prone areas and enable us to assess the potential vulnerability to people and property. And as Demelza described, the Environment Agency publish a variety of data sets, including flood zone data sets, which show their sort of best estimate of the areas of land at risk to flooding. So on screen at the moment, I've got the flood zone 2 data set in view, looking at the 1 in 1,000 chance of flooding, and there's also the flood zone 3 data set as well. Now you can download these data sets directly from the Environment Agency, or if you're a CAD-Corp customer hosted in the cloud, you can also access these data sets via our data service. And the benefit of that is we sort of download and maintain the concurrency of the data sets on your behalf. So all you need to do is to simply connect to the data from within our software. Now, in addition to these flood zone data sets, there's also the recorded flood outlines data sets. This shows individual historic flood outlines, and that's based on flooding from rivers, the sea, groundwater, and surface water. And they also publish an historic flood map data set as well. So this shows sort of the maximum flood extent, and I believe it combines sort of the individual records from that previous data set, but I think it excludes areas where areas have been flooded by surface water. But yeah, I'll definitely recommend visiting the Environment Agency's website so you can find out more about these individual data sets. But in terms of visualization, these data sets alongside the Ordnance Survey mapping gives us that insight into those potentially flood-prone areas. And with the sort of capabilities available within web mapping, we can also screen for vulnerabilities as well within our community. Now, one example might be to extract a list of addresses that perhaps fall within a potentially sort of flood risk area. Now, in web mapping, in the top left-hand corner, we can do this type of searching using the query tool to do that assessment. So here I'm going to say I want to search for addresses within a particular flood zone area. So we're going to select that area on the map. We'll complete the query, and it basically takes that selected flood zone, queries all the addresses that fall within that particular area, and then the output is this table here, which provides me a list of all of the addresses that were found. And in the bottom right hand corner, it tells us 228 addresses were found. Um, we can also export the results of this search to CSV, and the benefit here is that we can obviously use that list outside of the mapping application. Excuse me, and that means we can maybe look at the makeup of the properties. So maybe look at residential versus commercial, maybe see if there's any high risk properties in that list. Maybe there's a care home that might require special assistance in case of a flood event or an evacuation scenario. But that query option is a really powerful but really easy to use tool. And I've used that here to screen for vulnerabilities within a flood zone area. You can, of course, use GIS to visualize these vulnerabilities as well. So here I've got those same flood zone areas, but here I've added a label to describe the number of properties potentially at risk within this particular area. And I've also highlighted how many of them are residential as well. But you could do something similar with other vulnerabilities. Maybe we've got information about known vulnerable people who might require that additional support in a flood event. You might also find useful the structures data set from the Ordnance Survey, and this is available from the National Geographic database, and the structures theme identifies features like bridges. So here's an example where I'm showing bridges along a river, and these are shown as these red areas, but also they have a points version of the structures data theme, and that includes all sorts of features that might be of interest, especially with today's use case in mind. So it includes some utility type information. So that includes sort of telecommunication masts and electricity support poles. But yeah, being able to sort of overlay all of this different type of information with the flood zone data, we can screen for all of these sort of vulnerabilities. And in terms of utilities, it might be understanding if is there any telephone masts which might be impacted in a flood event with that particular data theme. So yeah, there are a variety of data sets available for you to view those flood prone areas, but also assess the potential vulnerability to people and property. Okay, so we've looked at the use of sort of flood mapping data for longer term planning and identifying areas which are at risk to flooding, but how can we use web mapping to communicate that threat of flood in real time? Now, the Environment Agency provide flood warnings through a variety of different channels, one of which is their real-time flood monitoring API. And this provides access to near real-time information covering flood warnings and alerts, flood areas where these particular warnings or alerts apply, and there's also measurements of water levels and flows from river monitoring stations. And here's an example of that flood warning information from the API. And at this particular scale, I've chosen to visualize the warnings with these warning triangles, which you might recognize. But as I zoom into the map, I've changed the view of that data set so that I can now see the flood areas where these particular warnings apply. So these are the areas that could be at risk to flooding. And if I click on this flood warning area from the API, you get a variety of information. So that includes sort of the severity level of that flood warning, and it'll also provide a description of that warning as well. That data feed updates on an hourly cycle. So if there are new flood warnings issued, or if existing warnings were stood down, then these changes would be reflected on the map dynamically. And for my demonstration today, I'm actually showing you sort of a snapshot of flood warnings that I'd taken last month. I was a bit worried if I kept this view live for the webinar today, there wouldn't actually be any flood warnings on the day of this webinar. So but in the live environment, you'll have a direct feed, and that will provide you that valuable view of those current flood warnings in place. Now, in addition to the flood warning information, the API also provides a number of other data sets that you can tap into. That includes river monitoring stations. So the Environment Agency have a number of river monitoring stations which can provide sort of recent water levels and flow information. So if I click on this monitoring station here near Spilsby, yeah, this could be a useful resource if you want to monitor the river levels to see if there are any that are rising in height and might cause a concern. And then just to finish off on their sort of API examples, they've also got approximately 1,000 real-time rain gauges around the country as well, which records the amount of precipitation. So yeah, if I click on this monitoring station here, yeah, it just provides you that levels in millimeters. So yeah, it might be just another set of data that might be interesting to sort of monitor to look at the amount of precipitation that is currently falling. So all of the examples I've shown you so far, yeah, requires an element of interaction from yourselves, we're turning on and off different data sets. We're, clicking on the data on the map to find out more information, or we're using tools in the such as Query to also search for data as well. But you could use local knowledge to deliver that flood warning information as an alternative approach. So in the top right hand corner of the interface, I'm actually going to navigate to a location of interest. I'm going to do that as a postcode search, and then select that postcode, and it will take me to that location there on the map. And then from the main menu in the top left hand corner, I'm going to run local knowledge. Now, local knowledge can be designed to query all those flood data sets and then summarize that key information on the left hand side alongside the map. So it uses the current center of my map. I've queried the information, and on the left hand side, local knowledge has looked at the flood zone data, and I'm asking, does this location fall within a flood zone? Yes, the answer is yes. Underneath, the same type of query, but this time I'm looking at the live flood warning data, and it tells me yes, I'm currently in an active flood warning area. The example underneath, I'm doing a sort of a different approach, a different query, but it's actually looking at the same data as a previous example. So this time I'm asking local knowledge to find all flood warnings within a 25-kilometer radius. The next example, find my nearest type search. Can you tell me the 3 nearest Environment Agency river monitoring stations to this location? It's given us sort of the river levels there. Perhaps you've got concern for this local area and we just want to look at the river levels nearby. And in a similar vein, underneath, find my nearest search, but this time returning the 2 nearest rain gauge stations. And then the last example in this local knowledge, is just using local knowledge as another way of sharing the same information we queried earlier. So I use that query tool to find number of addresses within the flood zone that might be at risk of flooding. I'm using local knowledge here to return that same information. And these are just some examples that you can use local knowledge for, but you can configure this to query and present whatever information you think is important. And local knowledge is just another way that you can use web mapping to provide that location intelligence. It can query multiple data sets at the same time and then just present a summary of that information that might be helpful for maybe pre-planning or monitoring live flood warning information. Now, moving away from the map for a few moments, that same local knowledge technology that I've just demonstrated to you also sits behind our CAD Corp Notice Board application. And Notice Board works like a web page. It shows different panels of information, and it could be used to communicate information to the public to help them plan for flood events if they live in a flood risk area. So as a visitor to Notice Board, you can access it on a mobile device. Therefore, you could use your current device location to run a search. Alternatively, we can run a search here at the top, which I'm going to do today. So I'm going to type in my postcode, select the postcode, and then local knowledge does its thing again. So it takes in the location of that postcode I selected, querying my flood information, my flood data, but this time, instead of using a map to present that information, we've got a dashboard, and very quickly I've got information tailored for this particular postcode location. So on the left-hand side, yep, I've got flood warning information. I've got the widget here from the Environment Agency. Underneath, I've got, yeah, we can still include an embedded map showing sort of flood risk using the flood zone data. In the middle of the dashboard, I'm providing information on, how to protect your home, sharing ideas on creating an action plan. You can also embed video, so YouTube video there, which might be sharing advice as well. And then underneath, I find my nearest type search within notice boards, so highlighting where the nearest medical services are located. And then on the right-hand side of the dashboard, just using it to inform where to get updates from media channels. So includes quick links to social media pages to get updates, and then underneath some further information about nearby emergency shelters and help information for the recovery effort after a flood. But it's just a different way of spreading that word and communicating that information to the public and still using location at its core. And just to show its versatility, you can publish as many different notice boards or dashboards as you like. And here I'm using a notice board to share response type information. So it could be links to emergency response plans or key stakeholder contact information, an embedded map here showing where we've had reported flood locations, and then on the right hand side, again, information about nearest sort of shelters and temporary accommodation, and also sort of a weather widget here as well. But yeah, it's a versatile product, tailored to whatever your needs are. And in these two particular examples I've just shown you, you can use it to provide that information to help plan for a flood event and also provide response information as well. Okay, so I'm going to return back to the web mapping interface. Now, yeah, web mapping is not just about sharing pretty informative maps, but yes, it can also be used to help empower in community engagement as well. So in a flood event, we rely on information provided by the community to help us respond to an emergency event. And this information can be sent to the authorities using the map. And one example might be to inform the authorities where flooding has occurred. And to support this mechanism, Report It for WebMap provides a platform to do this, and it can also be integrated within your existing system. So Report It within this desktop view here, but more importantly, it can be accessed on a mobile device as well. You can use Report It to say, yep, I need to report a location of a flood, and I'm going to do that by clicking the location on the map, and I'm going to report a flooded highway. So I'm just going to click the flooded highway there, and then click next. Now, the next step of this report submission, we have a form. You can design this form to your own requirements, choose what information you want to gather. Fields can be set as mandatory fields. You can also design fields with drop-down lists as well. So as a member of the public, I'm going to just provide some details in this form as requested. So the telephone number, date of my submission, where is the flood? So here's a drop down. So yeah, I'm going to say the flood's related to a highway. Can I provide any further details? So let's say the highway is flooded and not passable. And then you can also have an option to upload imagery as well. So again, really handy on a mobile device. If you're out, you can take that picture and you can submit that evidence as part of that report. And then sort of the last part of that report submission is a final sort of contact detail. So here, just asking for an email address. So we'll just populate that, security check, and then hit send. Now that report I guess for audit purposes is saved to a database, but it can also it's also sent as an email notification to the team that needs to respond to that particular report. So in this occasion, maybe that report goes to the highways team, who might need to go out and set up some road closure signs to prevent any vehicles passing through this particular highway. So it's a simple, intuitive way here of just using web mapping to allow your community to report flood locations with the map. And because that information is recorded to a database, you could have a dynamic view of the reports in the map as well. So here we're looking at that data, and I can already see the report that I've just submitted. If I click on that report, on the left-hand side, I can view some of the details that I provided with that report. It's also worth noting I've actually configured the information here as well. So I've purposely removed the display of any of the personal information I submitted with that report. And I can also access that photograph that was submitted as part of that report there as well. And to be honest, with kind of the reporting capabilities, you might just have this as a dedicated map set up just for this reporting purpose. And you could have this view here. So on the map, display all of the flood reports that have already been submitted. So me as a member of the public, if I come on to access this map, I want to do a report, I can actually see if someone has already reported it before perhaps sending any duplicated reports to the local authority. So just to finish off my demonstration today, we're going to take a look at sort of another delivery method for conveying information, and that is Power BI. So yeah, Power BI is becoming very popular for business intelligence reporting, and it could also be used as a platform for monitoring post-flood recovery efforts. Now, I'm no Power BI expert, I'll admit that, but I've prepared some two sort of example reports here which report on addresses that have been flooded and highways that are currently closed. And I've used two embedded maps within this report. Firstly, to display the properties that have been affected, I can zoom and interact with the map. I could hover over one of these properties here to see some information. Underneath, I've also used a second embedded map to show highways that are currently closed. And then obviously, yeah, the major benefit of Power BI is that you can share this information as a dashboard, and this can be accessed by your stakeholders or decision makers, and they can use the functionality within this dashboard to sort of drill down on the data. So maybe I'm interested in the impact of flooding on Broadbank. So if I select Broadbank in this chart, it tells me 15 properties were flooded. We can see them and where they are on the map. I can also see underneath that this particular highway is also closed currently. And then on the left, this chart is just giving us a breakdown of the types of properties affected. So I can see 14 of those properties were residential. If I sort of reset that chart, another drop down here, allows me to focus on sort of commercially affected properties as well. And that kind of filtering, updates all the visuals accordingly, including the map, so I can see the location of those commercial properties. And obviously the benefit here is that the mapping gives you that geographical perspective to the problem at hand. And I'll very quickly just flash up one more example. And I was reading a published document online which talked about the importance of sort of property flood resilience, and it shared loads of stories from homeowners and businesses who have sort of adapted their own properties to help them recover more quickly after a flood. So they shared ideas such as tiling all the floors on the ground level, moving all the electrics higher up in the walls on the ground level as well, installing flood doors, applying waterproof plaster, raising kitchen appliances. So yeah, lots of different ways that I actually hadn't come across myself before to kind of help improve that recovery effort after a flood. And this report in front of you, yeah, is a very simple example compared to the previous one, but it could be simply, publishing all of those properties that were affected by a flood, and perhaps using this information to send out that targeted sort of post-flood advice on how homeowners could perhaps make their properties more flood resilient in the future if unfortunately they've had a history of flood events, and perhaps recommending applying for any grants that might be available to help them become more resilient. So that brings an end to my demonstration today. So I've shared a lot of examples of how web mapping can be used to identify, communicate, and help mitigate those flood related challenges. So thank you for watching my demonstration. I'm now going to pass you back to Demelza for the rest of this webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Simon. So many examples for us to think about. Now, as well as software, you have seen from both Simon and I a huge number of data sources. CADCorp do provide a managed database, including many data sources. That includes those from the Environment Agency, Ordnance Survey, Office for National Statistics, and others around the UK. Now, for the APIs, we can point you in the right direction as well. So the point of pulling all this information together is to take away the overhead of you having to manage this data yourselves and obviously keep it up to date. There's potentially a lot more useful data out there for flooding, and we can look at adding these to our flood database should you need access to these other data sources. So just in terms of rounding up today, to convey flood information, web mapping tools that you've seen and data are really very powerful. CAGOPSys web map is flexible. It can help you know where the risk is, be prepared, have early warning systems, and a coordinated sort of recovery approach as well. And CAGOP can assist you in delivering flood-related hosted and managed services like web mapping, um, but also consultancy services. We've not seen any today, but Simon's done some work in the background. But we do provide further software and services for analytics, modeling, and 3D type capabilities. And if you'd like to find out more about these or anything that you've seen today, please make a note in the exit survey, and my colleagues and myself and my colleagues will be in contact. Indeed, if you would like a demo for your specific organisation, this is something we can organise too. Now, just before we head on to your questions, feel free to carry on adding your questions. This is today the first in a series of 3 webinars. We've used flooding as the topic today, but you're all invited to these other webinars that we have in the series. The first one looks at ESG, or environmental social governance targets and achievements. And the second one looks at economic development, social equality, and environmental sustainability. And we'll be presenting those in the near future. And you'll be sent an email with a link to register if you haven't already done so. Okay, questions. I'm going to put my camera back on. Simon, if you can do that as well too, please. Right, we've got a few questions. I think I will pick up on the API questions to begin with. I'll direct this one at you, Simon. Mike asks, how do you connect to the Environment Agency API? Do you need to be a developer?
The simple answer is no. Yeah, you don't need to be a developer. We do have an easy to use wizard in our desktop software where you can connect to the API, and that's via our CAD Corp Open Data Service. Alternatively, you can just edit a GeoJSON file and connect to the API this way instead.
Thanks, Simon. And we've got three questions about the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency similar API. So I believe some similar information is provided by that API. It's not currently supported, but please talk to us. We'd like to support as many data sets as possible, and we can look into being able to connect to the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency API too. So thank you for your questions around that. I've got a question. Is there any training available for setup and using these tools? So CADCOP provides a number of standard training courses, and we can also create bespoke courses specific to your requirements as well. Um, so I think we will draw to a close at that stage. There's a few questions I'm aware we haven't answered. Don't worry, myself or my colleagues will be directly in contact after the webinar today to answer those for you. Indeed, if there's anything you haven't asked, as I mentioned, there will be an exit survey pop up. So please do ask questions in there. Um, Finally, we would really appreciate if you could fill in that exit survey, and it will help us to continue to deliver webinars like the one you've seen today. Really hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you for attending. Have a great day.